Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an incredible and chilling story. Let's meet Sterling Whitmore, an atheist and skeptical philosophy professor who denied God his entire life until he died and met Jesus face to face. During his near-death experience, he was dragged into an abyss of darkness, but a mysterious being rescued him and revealed to him a shocking truth about God and the destiny of the soul. What he saw on the other side changed his life forever, and his message could change yours too. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense and surprising journey. The sound of dry leaves shuffling along the sidewalk was a reminder that autumn had arrived in Chicago. The sharp wind whistled between the buildings, invading my minimalist house through the cracks in the windows. I barely noticed. My mind was immersed in the article I was writing for an academic publication. The title, The Paradox of Religion, a Man-Made God. I spent my entire life challenging beliefs. Faith was, for me, a reflection of human fear of the unknown. As a philosophy professor, he had already participated in countless debates where he refuted the existence of any personal deity. God was a comfortable concept for those who needed meaning, but the truth was cold, logical, and indifferent. I looked at the wall clock, 23:43. The loneliness of the night was my only company. My daughter, Lillian, hadn't called in weeks. After the accident that left her paraplegic, our relationship became increasingly distant. Maybe she blamed me. Maybe I just never knew how to be a father. I sighed and took a sip of the coffee, now cold. The light from the lamp illuminated my desk, full of notes, books by Nietzsche, Bertrand Russell and Sartre. Amid the underlined pages, my cell phone vibrated. A missed call from an unknown number. I ignored it. The world was predictable, and, that night, nothing seemed capable of surprising me. It was then that I felt the pain. First came discomfort, pressure in the chest. I thought it was just tiredness, but within seconds, the grip tightened, as if invisible claws were crushing my heart. A cold sweat covered my forehead. My hands were shaking. The glass fell from my table, shattering on the floor. A heart attack. I tried to get up, but my legs gave way. Panic took over. My body was betraying me, and my rational mind could do nothing to stop it. It was at that moment that I heard the voice, serious, powerful, authoritarian. You will die, but I have a mission for you. My eyes widened. Was I hallucinating? Was the oxygen-deprived brain already collapsing? But the voice continued, go inside, pack a bag, and be ready to go to the hospital. I didn't want to believe it, but for some inexplicable reason, I followed the order. I dragged myself to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase and threw some clothes inside, even though I felt like every movement was a superhuman effort. With the little strength I had left, I called 911. While waiting for the ambulance, I fell to my knees. The last thing I saw was the reflection of red lights spinning in the window. Then everything went dark. The darkness was total. Not like when we close our eyes. Not like a room without light. It was an absolute emptiness, an absence of everything. My senses seemed to have been erased, as if I no longer had a body, just consciousness. At first I thought he was sleeping, but then the perception of time began to disappear. It was impossible to know whether seconds or centuries had passed. I was lost. I tried to speak, but my voice was gone. My heart should have been beating, but I felt nothing. I was died. It was then that I realized I was falling. It was a strange feeling, not like falling off a building or a cliff. There was no wind, no resistance, just an eternal plunge into nothingness. Something was pulling me down, and then I saw it. Down there, far below where I was, there was a bottomless black pit, if you could call it that. It was more than a hole. It was a vacuum, a force that devoured everything around it. Pure and absolute oblivion, and I was heading straight for it. The terror I felt was indescribable. Never in my entire life have I felt such primal fear. It wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of ceasing to exist, of being forgotten, of being consumed by something that would never let me return. I tried to hold on to something, anything, but there was nothing there. Just the certainty that, if I reached the bottom of that well, I would never come out. I was doomed. It was at that moment that doubt hit me like lightning. What if I was wrong? What if God existed? What if this was the fate of the arrogant, of those who denied the divine and lived only for themselves? My mind, always so logical and rational, collapsed, and, for the first time in my life, I prayed. Not with elaborate words, not with philosophy, just a cry, a desperate scream. Jesus, help me. And he came. First, it was a touch. Something grabbed my wrist. Immediately, I stopped falling. The terror was still in me, but the descent stopped as if an invisible force had interrupted my trajectory. I was pulled. Fast. So fast that the void around me began to distort, as if I were traversing dimensions. The darkness melted away, and then the light appeared. The light enveloped me like a wave. It was unlike any light I had ever seen. Not just a glow, but a presence. It didn't blind. It didn't burn. It just calmed. The fear that dominated my being began to dissipate, as if that light had the power to dissolve everything that was negative. It was then that I realized I was standing somewhere. The ground beneath my feet wasn't solid, but it wasn't ethereal either. It was as if I were floating on a surface made of pure existence. There was no horizon, no sky, no ceiling, just a wide, limitless space, filled with golden, bluish light. And before me, he was there, a man in a white robe, simple, unadorned, unostentatious. His face was ordinary, but at the same time, impossible to describe. It was as if his every feature was changeable, reflecting something different every second. His eyes, however, were constant, a deep, infinite blue. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. He just extended his hand. I didn't say anything, but I understood. The presence that emanated from him was unlike anything I had ever felt. He didn't need to speak, because his existence spoke for itself. And then, I realized, I knew who he was. Who are you? My own question sounded silly. The man smiled slightly but did not respond. All around, the environment began to change. The light shone even brighter, and I felt like we were no longer alone. The angels were there. First came a sound, a song without origin, as if the air itself were singing. Then, the vision. 6 or 7 figures appeared, tall as towers, radiating an almost unbearable glow of beauty. His eyes had no pupils, but they were not empty. They were made of pure consciousness. They didn't have wings as we imagine. They were condensed light, living energy. And then, their voices echoed inside my mind. You have a choice to make. They didn't need to move their lips. They spoke directly to my being. That's when I realized they knew everything about me, my mistakes, my hits, my doubts, my pride, and above all, my fear. Why was I, a skeptic, there? Why was I, who spent my life denying God, rescued? The answer came like a whisper inside me, because someone cried out to me, Lillian, my daughter. She still prayed for me, and now, I had a choice. The angels remained before me, radiant and imposing. They didn't need to speak with words. Their presence communicated everything I needed to know. The man in the white robe, the one who had rescued me from the abyss, remained motionless, watching me with a serene but profound gaze. Then the angels spoke again, their voices echoing inside my mind like soft thunder. You have a choice to make. It was at that moment that I understood the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a test. I could lie there, enveloped by that unbreakable peace, feeling a love that my human mind could never fully comprehend. There was no pain, there was no sadness, there was no doubt. I could go back. The idea of returning to Earth hit me like an electric shock. Why? The world outside was cold, chaotic, cruel. My life was filled with regrets, loneliness, and mistakes I didn't know if I could fix. Here, there was everything I had ever sought. But then, something invaded my mind. A name, Lillian, my daughter. Her thought pierced me like a sharp blade. I saw his face clearly, as if he were there in front of me. I saw her tears when she was paralyzed after the accident. I saw your pain when, instead of being a present father, I emotionally distanced myself. I was a coward, and yet, she still prayed for me. One of the angels stepped forward. His voice, or rather his thought, resonated in my soul. Your time on earth is not yet over, but the final choice is yours. I was shaking. I felt every word. I remembered the question I asked so much in life. If God existed, Why did he allow suffering? Now, faced with the indisputable reality of its existence, I realized that the question was wrong. Human suffering was not a punishment. It was a lesson. Each choice had a weight, a consequence. And my final fate would depend on what I did from that moment on. For the first time, I really understood what it was free will. My gaze turned to the white-robed man. If I go back, my voice was shaky. Will I be able to return here one day? He looked at me with infinite patience. And then, one of the angels replied, "That's up to you." That answer crushed me, because I knew exactly what it meant. There was no guarantee that, if I died again, I would return to this place. My choices on earth would define my eternal destiny. I desperately wanted to stay there. But Lillian, she needed me. I took a deep breath, or at least, it felt like I did. "I want to go back," I declared, even though I felt a tight knot in my chest. Instantly, everything around me began to change. As soon as I declared my decision to return, I felt a change in the atmosphere. The light around me seemed to vibrate, as if space itself was reacting to my choice. The air, if it could be called that, became denser, charged with something immeasurable. The white-robed man was still there, standing, watching me with those unfathomable eyes. But now, something was different. Its brightness increased. His presence expanded, becoming more intense, more powerful. And then, suddenly, I knew. The truth hit me like an unquestionable revelation. He was Jesus. My heart, or whatever my conscience was at that moment, shuddered. My entire body vibrated with this realization. I, who had spent my life denying the existence of God, now stood before him. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Are you Jesus?" He looked at me with infinite patience. A serene smile formed on his lips. "I am the one you call Lord." My mind couldn't process it. My legs gave out, and I knelt. It was an instinctive gesture, as if my very being understood that there before him I was nothing, and at the same time I was everything. An avalanche of emotions took over me. Shame, repentance, gratitude. I know spent my whole life saying that you didn't exist. My voice trailed off. He didn't respond, because he didn't need. He knew. He always knew. The only thing he did was get closer. And when he touched my chest, everything changed. The pain, the guilt, the fears, the doubts disappeared. In their place, an indescribable warmth washed over me. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a cure. I felt something being rebuilt inside me. Not just my heart, but my soul. And then something even more extraordinary happened. My mind expanded. For an instant, a only moment, I could see what he saw. Christ consciousness. I understood. I felt it. I understood that he knew everything. Every thought, every emotion, every choice that any human being had ever made or would make. Time for him was not linear. He saw everything at the same time. And still, he loved each of us unconditionally. My mind bowed before that immensity. I could never be the same again. Jesus removed his hand from my chest and looked at me again. "Are you ready to go back?" I didn't want to, but I needed it. With a lump in my throat, I nodded. He just smiled. And then, everything around me began to dissolve. The last thing I saw was his gaze, and in him was all the truth of the universe. The light around me began to pulse, as if it were breathing. My body, or my consciousness, felt light. But I knew something was about to happen. Jesus never looked away from me. There was something he still needed to show me. In the next instant, I was enveloped by an inexplicable energy. The light around me fragmented like glass shattering into millions of glittering shards. And then I saw it. He was no longer in the heavenly realm. Now he was in front of a large mirror, but it was no ordinary mirror. The surface did not reflect my image. It reflected the future, and what I saw made my heart freeze. First, I saw a hospital. It was me, lying in a bed, surrounded by machines and heart monitors. My skin was pale, my expression blank. The doctors were talking among themselves, and I could hear one of them say, "If he survives, it will be a miracle." The image has changed. I saw my daughter, Lillian. She was sitting in her wheelchair, crying silently. But the most painful thing was what I know via. I wasn't there. The meaning hit me like a punch in the gut. If I died, Lillian would be completely alone. I could feel her loneliness, her sadness, her pain. And then, the scene changed again. Now I saw myself, years in the future. But this was not the same man I knew. I was different, older but stronger. I was standing in front of an auditorium full of people. Some were crying. Others looked at me with wide eyes, absorbing every word. And then I heard my own voice. I died. I saw the other side. I saw Jesus. The crowd fell silent. I was telling my experience. But it wasn't just a report. It was a testimony. I was there to warn them, to open the eyes of those who still doubted. As I once doubted, the view changed again. Now I saw something that terrified me. I saw myself, but this time, I was back in the darkness. The same black pit, the same endless void. My future self screamed, but there was no one to hear. And then, the revelation came. If I returned to Earth, I would have two options. Live up to what I've learned and return to paradise, or ignore my mission and end up lost forever. The choice would always be mine. The vision disappeared, the mirror dissolved into thin air, and I faced Jesus again. His gaze was steady. If you go back, your path will not be easy. His voice was serene, but unmistakable. But what you do with the life you're given, that's up to you. I swallowed hard. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. I could choose the comfort of eternity now, or I could go back and face the unknown. But I knew what the answer was. You needed to go back, for my daughter, for my mission, for the truth that I had found. I'm ready, I declared. And then, the world fell apart around me. As soon as I declared my decision to return, everything around me started to change. The light that was once so welcoming began to dissipate, as if it were moving away from me. The angels remained still, watching me with serene expressions, but there was something in their eyes that I couldn't decipher. Perhaps it was a touch of sadness or a deep respect for what was about to happen. Jesus was still in front of me. His face radiated an unbreakable peace, but I knew he understood the weight of my choice. He approached and said, "Remember, you are being given a second chance, but it is not guaranteed. Every choice you make will shape your path. Walk wisely, Sterling." My heart, or whatever my conscience was at that moment, felt an indescribable grip. Will I be able to come back here? My voice sounded more fragile than I wanted. Jesus' eyes shone with something that seemed like infinite love. "That's just up to you." My breathing hitched. I wanted to ask more, but before I could form any words, I felt something pulling my soul back. The light disappeared in the blink of an eye, and then darkness swallowed me again. It wasn't the same darkness as the black pit. It was different. It was the darkness of a forced return, as if I were being sucked into an invisible vortex. My consciousness spun. Everything around me dissolved into fragments of light and shadow. My body felt like it was being pulled by millions of invisible threads. And then, I listened. Voices, but not the angelic voices. They were human. Pressure dropping. Charge with 200 joules. He's leaving." The pain came like an electric shock. My chest burned. A crushing weight took over me. My eyes opened for a second, but everything was blurry. I saw faces above me, doctors, nurses, all running. A long beep sounded. "We lost him," I screamed, but my voice didn't come out. That's when a shock ran through my body. A brutal impact, a bolt of lightning piercing my chest. My vision went dark. For a moment I thought I had failed. But then, something happened. A faint light pierced the darkness, not like the heavenly light from before, but a familiar, cold, artificial light. The eyes opened, and I saw the white ceiling of the ICU. The sound of machines filled my ears. The pain in my chest was unbearable. I was back. A voice next to me shouted, "He's back!" Confusion overwhelmed me. My body felt like stone. My breathing was labored, but I could feel the air coming in. I was alive. And the first thing that crossed my mind was a single sentence: "I know the truth." The feeling of being in my body again was suffocating. The weight of my limbs, the pain in my chest, the difficulty of breathing. It all felt brutally real after the lightness on the other side. I wanted to stand up, speak, shout that I had stood before Jesus, that life continued beyond death, that everything I believed was wrong, but my body didn't respond. The only thing I could do was to feel. The sounds of the hospital began to become clearer. The beeping of machines, the hurried footsteps of nurses, the voices murmuring about my condition. My mind, however, was not there. I still saw the eyes of Jesus. I still felt his hand holding mine. I still heard his words. That's just up to you. I swallowed hard, my throat feeling parched. I had a second chance. But what would I do with her? The next few hours were a blur. Doctors came in and out of the room, testing my reflexes, checking my vitals. I saw their surprised faces. It was as if my recovery made no sense to them. His heart stopped for 2 full minutes, said Dr. Caldwell, the cardiologist in charge of my case. We didn't think we could bring him back. 2 minutes. For them, that was it. But I knew I lived an eternity somewhere else. The doctor looked at me cautiously, as if trying to understand something. Have you tried anything different? I hesitated. If I told the truth, would they call me crazy? Delusional? But then I remembered. I made a choice. I came back for a reason. Yes, I murmured, my voice weak. I saw something. The doctor raised his eyebrow. Do you want to talk about it? I wanted, but not with him. There was someone more important I needed to see first. Lillian. The following days were of slow recovery. My body was still weak, but my mind had never been stronger. Every moment that passed was a reminder that I had time. Time to correct my mistakes. Time to find my daughter. Time to fulfill my mission. And then, the moment finally arrived. The door to the hospital room opened, and there she was, Lillian, the same girl I had left behind, sitting in the wheelchair, her gaze wavering as she stared at me. I felt a lump in my throat. If I hadn't come back, she would never see me again. Lillian blinked in surprise. Daddy? I tried to speak, but my voice broke, so I did the only thing I could. I leaned forward, reached out my hand and took hers. Forgive me. She remained motionless for a moment. Then, tears filled her eyes, and without saying anything, she squeezed my hand back. I knew what I had to do from there, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to start. The day I left the hospital was the first day of my new life. The cold Chicago air hit my face as the automatic doors opened, and for the first time in years, I took a deep breath, feeling the reality of being alive. It wasn't just a second wind, it was a mission. Lillian was beside me, silent. There was still a distance between us, a chasm carved out by years of emotional neglect, but I knew I could rebuild it. She was still there, and that meant there was hope. In the following days, I reflected a lot on what had happened. As a philosophy professor, my natural first reaction would be to rationalize, trying to find scientific explanations, chemical processes in the brain, hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen. But IU knew that it hadn't been an illusion. That place was real. Jesus was real. The choice I made was real. And then, something happened. I started to have vivid dreams. In dreams, I was back in that heavenly realm. I saw faces, places, flashes of events that had not yet occurred. And most importantly, I saw people I didn't know yet. That's when I understood the truth. Jesus didn't just bring me back to life. He gave me a message. And this message needed to be shared. My first lecture happened by chance. I was in a bookstore, looking through a book about neuroscience and near-death experiences. The subject fascinated me, but no study there could capture what I experienced. That was when a group of young people, sitting in a circle at a table, began to discuss life after death. One of them, laughing, said, "If someone died and came back to tell me, then I would believe it." I stopped, and for the first time, without fear, without hesitation, I said, "I died, and I came back." Everyone looked at me. I sat down and began to tell my story. At first I saw skepticism in their eyes, but as I described what I saw, the angels, Jesus, the abyss, silence took over the room. When I finished, no one laughed. One of the young people, a young man of about 20, seemed shaken. "Is this real?" he asked, voice shaking. I looked him in the eye and replied, "More real than anything you've ever experienced." It was at that moment that I realized my mission had begun. From then on, I never stopped. I started speaking at small gatherings, then at churches. My testimony soon spread. Before long, I was invited to talk about my experience on radio programs, university lectures, and finally, at conferences on spirituality. Skeptics challenged me. Scientists tried to discredit it. But nothing they said could change what I knew. I saw Jesus. I've been on the other side, and I came back with a purpose. Over time, people began to change because of my testimony. People who, like me, had lost their faith, who lived in the darkness of skepticism, but who now had something new, hope. I didn't ask them to believe me. I just told my truth. And for those who were ready to listen, that was enough. The years passed. My story has covered distances I never imagined. Former university colleagues, those who once saw me as a bastion of rationalism, now considered me a man gone mad. I lost many friends, but I found something much greater than academic recognition. I found the truth. The people who sought me out were not just curious. They were thirsty for something beyond what science could explain, thirsty for proof that life does not end with death. And I told them the only thing I knew with total conviction: death is not the end. I know this because I died. I saw Jesus, and he gave me a choice. We always have a choice. One night, after an event where I shared my experience, a man approached me. He must have been around 50 years old, looked tired, dressed simply, but his eyes were filled with despair. "My daughter is dying," he said, his voice breaking. I held his gaze. He took a deep breath, trying to find the courage to continue. "She's in the hospital. The doctor said there's nothing more they can do." His voice trailed off, and he lowered his head. "I've never been a religious man. I've never taught my daughter to pray. But now, I don't know what to do." My heart sank. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let me go to her," I asked. He hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. In the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and the hum of machines filled the silence. The girl was lying on the bed, fragile, with tubes attached to her body. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His father approached and held his hand. "She still listens to me," he murmured. "I know you listen." I sat next to her, feeling my heart heavy. I knew what it was like to be on that threshold between life and death. I knew she might be listening, but her soul might already be somewhere else. I closed my eyes and did the only thing I could. I prayed, not with rehearsed words, but with my heart. "Jesus, if this is her time, guide her where she needs to go. But if there is still time, give her the same choice you gave me." The father sobbed, and then the girl opened her eyes. Time stopped. The man fell to his knees beside the bed, unable to contain his tears. The devices beeped. The monitors showed vital signs improving. The doctors rushed in disbelief. "That's impossible," one of them muttered. But I knew that it wasn't impossible. The girl looked at her father and whispered in a weak voice, but full of certainty, "I saw a man in a white robe." He said I still had a choice. My heart sank, because I knew exactly who she had seen. I left the hospital that night knowing that my mission was not just to tell my story. It was about helping others find their own answers. Science can explain many things, but it can't explain what I saw. You can't explain what that girl saw. And at the end of the day, science no need to explain, because the truth does not need to be proven. She just and I knew. You knew. Forever. Epilogue. The unquestionable truth today. When people ask me if I still fear death, I smile, because the answer is simple. No. Because I know what awaits me on the other side. And that's all I need to know. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.